In 1989, 5 children vanished from a foster home in rural Tennessee. No bodies were found. No suspects were charged. The only man who could have known what happened died in a fire, or so everyone believed. But 35 years later, a basement wall is torn down during a home renovation, and behind it, a locked filing cabinet, a set of unlabeled cassette tapes, and 5 names etched in the concrete. The same 5 who were never seen again. The man they buried might not have been the monster after all, because someone's still adding new names. If you're drawn to long-forgotten disappearances, disturbing discoveries, and cold cases that won't stay buried, subscribe now. October 17th, 2024. Location: Hollow Hills, Tennessee, Spencer property, basement renovation site. The hammer strike rang out like a bell in the stale silence of the basement. Sean Middleton paused, one booted foot braced on the splintered remains of an old workbench. Dust curled up around his ankles like smoke. He was 3 weeks into the demolition of the Spencer property, a long-abandoned rural house set to become a rustic Airbnb by next spring. And most of the work had been predictable. Rot, mold, pests. But this wasn't on the blueprints. The far wall, hidden behind a false panel and decades of mildew-stained insulation, revealed something solid, reinforced. Sean tapped it again with the back of his crowbar. Concrete, smooth, unpainted. He cleared away the insulation and pried at the edges. After several minutes, the panel gave way with a sharp pop of dislodged nails. Behind it, a recessed alcove. Dust and cobwebs clung to the ceiling. Set into the wall was a rusting metal filing cabinet. 4 drawers, heavy-duty. Locked. Next to it, partially buried in the concrete foundation, were words crudely carved into the wall. He leaned closer, brushing away grit. Jacob, Marnie, Devin, Sasha, little Billy. A chill rippled through him. Sean backed up, looked around. The basement was still. The air shifted. Not colder, heavier. He turned on his phone flashlight and shined it into the back of the alcove. On top of the cabinet sat a box of cassettes, the kind used in handheld recorders, 30 or 40 of them. Unlabeled, except for one. It read, Interview number 1, intake, Billy, July 5th, 1987. Sean swallowed hard. Billy Spencer. That name rang a bell. Wasn't there an old case, a missing foster kid, or 5? Sean didn't wait. He took photos, locked the basement, drove straight to the sheriff's office. By the time Detective Camille Reyes returned with him that evening, the press had already begun to stir. 35 years ago, a foster home in Hollow Hills caught fire under suspicious circumstances. The foster father, Henry Spencer, was presumed dead. His 5 wards were never found. Now someone had found a cabinet full of voices, and one of them was about to start talking again. October 18th, 2024. Location: Hollow Hills Sheriff's Department, Cold Case Division. Detective Camille Reyes had listened to a lot of tapes in her 22 years of law enforcement. Confessions, coercions, screams, lies, but never the voice of a child describing his own disappearance, decades after the fact. The tape deck on the evidence table clicked into place with the kind of analog finality modern devices lacked. No touchscreen, no file name, no scrub bar, just the hiss of anticipation. A faint whirring as the gears aligned. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed like insects. A storm rumbled somewhere over the Appalachian ridges. Camille sat back in her chair, one hand steady on her notepad, the other on the play button. She pressed down. A burst of static, then silence. Then, "This is Henry Spencer. July 5th, 1987. Intake recording. Billy, age 7. The man's voice was calm, formal, almost therapeutic. Not what she'd expected. "State your name for the tape, please." A pause. "Billy." "Full name?" "Billy Daniel Monroe." Camille closed her eyes. The boy's voice was small, reluctant. There was a softness around the edges, as though he were holding a blanket while speaking. The name matched the records. Billy Monroe, placed into foster care in 1987 after his mother's overdose. Assigned to Henry Spencer's Hollow Hills home. Last seen, July 6, 1989. How do you feel about coming to live here, Billy? Don't know. Do you miss your mama? Another long pause. She's dead. Camille opened her eyes. She scribbled quickly. Recording style equals interview plus therapeutic, but controlled. She'd heard predator logic before, when they tried to package abuse as affection. This had that smell. Well, here we use words like family and trust. You'll learn that in time. What about the others? They're your siblings now. Camille sat forward. Others, the fifth. She reached for the case file, one of several that had been reopened after yesterday's discovery. The oldest was Jacob Reyes, no relation. 10. Sasha Martin, 8. Devin Chang, 9. Marnie Lee, 6. Billy Monroe, 7. All placed under Spencer's foster care between 1985 and 1988. All disappeared before 1990. Officially, they died in the fire, but no remains had ever been recovered. Can I see the basement? Billy asked suddenly. Camille's pulse picked up. In time, Henry said. That's a reward. You earn that. Only the good ones go there. She stopped the tape. Silence slammed into the room like a wave. Only the good ones go there. Camille stared at the recorder, heart tight. This wasn't therapy. This was conditioning. Control. She stood, walked to the small evidence board on the east wall, and pinned a yellow sticky note under Henry Spencer's photo. The basement, your answer known location, possible grooming incentive. Access equals restricted. Behind her, Officer Rhea Simmons entered the cold case division with a coffee and a nervous look. Another tape just got logged. Officer Middleton brought it straight from the Spencer house. Camille raised an eyebrow. That man's going to end up solving the case if we don't move faster. Rhea smirked weakly and set the envelope on the desk. This one's labeled Volume 17. Marnie, July 1989. Camille's fingers froze midair. Marnie Lee, the youngest girl. She hadn't been in the foster system for long, just 11 months before the fire. Blonde, wore glasses, night terrors according to her intake file. Placed after being removed from a hoarder household. Camille didn't play this one yet. She couldn't, not without cataloging the first. Instead, she walked to the evidence shelf and retrieved the photo of the Spencer children from 1989. A staff member at the county fair had snapped it, not realizing it would become the last known image of them all together. They smiled in it. Bright shirts, balloon animals, nothing to suggest what was coming. Except Marnie. She wasn't smiling. She was staring to the side, off camera, toward something the lens hadn't caught. The sun was lowering outside the station windows when Camille drove to the scene. The Spencer house sat at the end of a gravel road choked with brush and oak trees, about 40 miles northeast of Nashville. The GPS didn't even register the address. She parked next to the contractor's truck. Sean Middleton stood outside, flannel sleeves rolled up, dust on his jeans. You found another, she said as she approached. He nodded grimly. It was wedged behind the HVAC vent, like someone had jammed it in during a rush. Camille raised an eyebrow, which means someone was trying to hide it from him, or from someone worse, Sean muttered. They entered the house through the back, Camille pausing at the threshold of the basement door. It had been sealed for 30 years. Until yesterday. Downstairs, a forensic team was now mapping the concrete walls, measuring tool markings, collecting the remaining tapes and cabinet files. Most were damp. Some were moldy. But all were intact. Camille descended carefully. Her boots echoed across the concrete. "Detective!" One of the forensic techs called from the far corner. "You're going to want to see this." She followed him to where a tarp had been lifted. A small wooden chair, bolted to the floor, with leather straps on each armrest. Camille's breath caught. Child-sized, burn marks on the legs. The detective turned toward the team. Has CSU confirmed the fire origin? Still working on it, the tech said, but it's looking more and more like arson, controlled, and the body they found upstairs, the body presumed to be Spencer's, was never DNA confirmed. Autopsy records are thin. Local sheriff at the time was dirty. Internal Affairs took him out in '93. Lot of holes. Camille's mind was already 5 steps ahead. What if Spencer never died in that fire? What if the man who ran this house walked away? She looked back at the chair and thought about the voice of Billy Monroe, whispering from a tape recorded 35 years ago. Only the good ones go there. October 20th, 2024. Location: Spencer property, basement scene. Second search warrant execution. The second warrant arrived at 8:15 a.m., signed by a federal judge this time. Camille Reyes stood in the driveway as the morning fog lifted from the Tennessee hills, watching the unmarked vans roll in one by one. This time, it wasn't just Hollow Hills PD and state forensic techs. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit had sent 2 agents. So had the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. They weren't just cataloging tapes now. They were looking for bodies. The Spencer house loomed ahead, its white siding grayed by rain and age, shutters drooping like a face in mourning. Someone had spray-painted a large red X on the front porch, standard for condemned buildings. But to Camille, it looked like a warning. Something here was buried, and not just tapes. Inside, the air smelled of dust, mildew, and something faintly metallic. She stepped through the threshold with a fresh pair of gloves and a clipboard. "Detective Reyes," said a voice from her left. Agent Joy Halstead extended a hand. Tall, early 40s, steely-eyed. "Behavioral Analysis Unit, Quantico." She didn't smile. "I've reviewed your notes. Impressive work." Camille nodded, motioning her toward the basement stairs. "It's all down there." They descended into cold concrete silence. The walls were already half-stripped. The old filing cabinet had been removed and tagged. The small wooden chair was now sealed in an evidence bag the size of a coffin. Joy's eyes landed on it. "Restraints on a child-sized seat, bolted in. That's not discipline, that's worship." Camille raised an eyebrow. "Worship?" Joy paced slowly around the room, fingers trailing along the wall. "There's a profile we've seen in rare cases. Men like Henry Spencer don't see themselves as predators. They see themselves as saviors, protectors of their chosen children. They create a world where everything makes sense to them and force the child to accept it." Camille thought of the tapes, the calm voice, the interviews. "Did you see this?" Joy gestured toward a back wall. Camille stepped closer. One brick was lighter than the rest, looser. She reached for her multi-tool and wedged it in, popping the brick free. Behind it, in a hollow, was a tightly rolled bundle of waxed fabric. She tugged it out gently. Inside, Polaroids, dozens, children, mid-laugh, mid-sob, caught off guard, their expressions blurry, intimate, deeply wrong. Marnie, Jacob, Devin, Sasha, Billy. One of them, Billy, was seated in what looked like a small pink room with no windows. On the back, in red ink, someone had written, "Reward Day Number 2, Subject, Billy, Room Progress, Accepting." Camille stepped back. Her mind reeled. These weren't just foster children. They were conditioned, documented, graded. She turned to Joy. "Do you think Spencer was working alone?" Joy didn't hesitate. Not a chance. The town of Hollow Hills wasn't large. Just a blip of post offices, gas stations, and churches surrounded by Tennessee wilderness. But it had secrets. Camille stopped by the county records office that afternoon, determined to dig deeper. She met with the archivist, a man named Colton Baines, who had worked there since 1985. "I need every document related to the Spencer home," she told him. "Permits, renovation records, licensing for foster care, anything with Henry Spencer's name." Colton scratched his beard. "Wasn't much back then, paper files mostly. But I remember that place. Used to be called Ridgeview House. Opened in '84. Closed after the fire in '89. Camille paused. "Wait. Ridgeview House?" Colton nodded. "Yup. Before Henry Spencer took it over, it was a treatment center for boys, behavioral stuff, lots of questionable oversight. State shut it down." Her pulse quickened. "So Spencer wasn't the first, not by a long shot." He led her into the dusty back stacks. After 40 minutes of digging, they found a box labeled Ridgeview, 1982 to 1984. Inside, incident reports, employee rosters, and a list of unaccounted disciplinary events. Camille scanned one sheet. March 7th, 1983. Boy refused to participate in reward session, restrained overnight. No incident noted. Below it, Supervisor H.S. Henry Spencer. Camille's stomach dropped. He hadn't just inherited the house. He'd trained there. That evening, back at her apartment, Camille played the second tape, the one labeled Marnie, July 1989. She sat in darkness, coffee in hand, notepad open. The tape crackled to life. Interview number 17, Marnie, age 6. "Do you want to be here today, Marnie?" "No." "Why not?" "I don't like the room." "What room?" "The pink one." "I want to go home." "This is home now. That other place was full of garbage and noise, remember?" "You said I'd get to go outside." "Only the good ones do. You're not ready yet." "Please." Camille hit pause. The voice of Marnie Lee was small, not broken yet, but unraveling. Every plea was met with sugar-sweet dismissal, control masquerading as care. And Spencer's voice? Calm, unwavering. The worst kind of predator, the kind who believes he's saving you. Outside Camille's apartment, the wind picked up. Tree branches scraped against the siding. A low rumble of thunder rolled across the sky. Camille stared at her wall of evidence. Tapes, photos, a timeline that stretched from 1982 to 1989, and the cabinet that had preserved it all, entombed behind concrete. Why keep the tapes at all? Unless he expected someone to find them. Unless he wanted to be remembered. The printer on her desk spit out a fresh lead. She'd run the Ridgeview staff list through a national teaching and medical database. 2 names were flagged as still active. One of them had recently applied for a license to open a behavioral boarding school outside Knoxville. The applicant? Dean Henry Spencer. Application filed in 2023. Camille stood up, heart pounding. The man presumed dead in a fire. May have just filed paperwork last year. Henry Spencer might still be alive, and if he was, he didn't stop at 5 children. October 22nd, 2024. Location, Knoxville, Tennessee. Behavioral Licensing Office in Spencer's alias lead investigation. The glass door of the Tennessee Department of Human Services buzzed open with the familiar chill of too strong air conditioning and the sour scent of old carpet. Detective Camille Reyes stepped inside, badge visible at her belt, carrying a file thick with fire, tape, and dust. Behind the reception desk, a young man with a clipboard barely looked up. "Here for placement services?" he asked. "No," she said, flashing her credentials. "Cold Case Division. I'm looking for a behavioral school application filed last year under the name Dean Henry Spencer that got his attention." He blinked, straightened. "That's not an applicant I remember." Camille nodded. "I wouldn't expect you to, but I need everything. Forms, contact info, background checks, any prior names, forwarding addresses." He gestured for her to wait and vanished behind a door labeled Records Archive. Camille tapped her pen rhythmically against her notebook as she waited. Outside, Knoxville moved like a city pretending fall had already arrived. Wind against windows, leaves swirling in the gutters. But the truth pressing down on her wasn't seasonal. If Henry Spencer was alive, he hadn't resurfaced by accident. He wanted access to children again. He wanted control. 10 minutes later, the clerk returned, pale and holding a red folder. He handed it to her with both hands like it was radioactive. Application was filed under Dean H. Saunders, but the birth date matches Spencer's. So does the signature if you compare to archived files. He listed an address in Clinton, just north of here. Camille flipped through the form. Name: Dean H. Saunders. Date of birth: October 11th, 1949. Request: charter license for New Way House, a behavioral school for boys. Submitted May 17th, 2023. Status: application incomplete. Denied due to insufficient staffing certification. She exhaled. Close, too close. The house address listed was a rural property off an old highway, just outside town. Camille stepped outside, dialed headquarters, and requested backup for a welfare check. Unoccupied residence, she said, but I want eyes on it before dark. This one might still breathe. By the time Camille and Officer Simmons pulled up the gravel drive, dusk had begun to bruise the edges of the sky. The property was modest, a small one-story brick home with a wide porch and boarded-up windows. An old Buick sat rusting in the side lot, mailbox sagging, power lines still connected. They approached cautiously. "Think he's inside?" Simmons whispered. "I don't think this is his nest," Camille replied, "but it's one of them." The front door was locked, but the back door had no deadbolt. Camille pushed it open slowly, gun drawn. Inside, silence. The air was thick with dust and mildew. No furniture, just a rotting couch frame and a stack of milk crates filled with outdated psychology books. In the corner, a desk. She moved toward it, sweeping her light across a map pinned above the desk, hand-marked with red dots. Tennessee, Georgia, North Carolina. Rural spots, most of them near churches or closed schools. On the desk itself, a Polaroid, fresh enough that the white edge hadn't yellowed yet. It showed two boys, no older than 8, sitting cross-legged on the floor of a pink room, almost identical to the one Billy Monroe had described on the tape. Behind them, the same chair, the same leather straps. A sticky note attached to the photo read, "Acceptance is easier without siblings." Camille felt the nausea climb her throat. Spencer wasn't just alive. He was replicating. Back at Hollow Hills, the cold case board now spanned 2 walls. The victims had names again: Billy, Marnie, Devin, Sasha, Jacob. Now possibly more. Each child was being revisited. Case files pulled, photos re-scanned, cross-referenced against every missing foster kid from 1985 to 1995. Dozens of overlaps emerged. Patterns began to form. Most came from disrupted homes. Few had extended family. All had behavioral labels. Defiant. Withdrawn. Prone to disassociation. They'd been filtered, cherry-picked from the system's blind spots. Camille sat alone in the evidence room that night, staring at the next tape. Devin, July 1988. She didn't press play. Not yet. Instead, she reopened the case file on Spencer's supposed death. The fire. It had been ruled accidental. Cause, faulty heater, remains found in bedroom, no dental confirmation, ID based on location and circumstantial belongings. But Camille noticed something. The remains were never described as charred, just unrecognizable. And the fire report noted a 15-minute burn window, not long enough for full-body incineration. It was possible Spencer staged it, planted a body, and vanished. Or worse, he'd had help doing it. She scribbled a note to herself. Who signed the autopsy report? Who declared the remains as Henry Spencer? She flipped to the coroner's section. Name: Dr. Leo Haynes, now deceased, but at the time, employed by Hollow Hills County. There was a witness listed in the margins. Someone who found the house ablaze before fire crews arrived. Witness: Marla K. Powell, age 13. Camille underlined the name twice. That was a child, a teenager, who might have seen who left the house that night. If she was still alive, she might be the last person to see Spencer walk away from the fire. The next morning, Camille stood outside a rural farmhouse 30 miles west of Hollow Hills. Cows in the field. An old windmill creaking in the yard. She knocked on the door. It opened slowly. A woman in her 40s stood there, cautious but not unfriendly. Her eyes narrowed when she saw the badge. "You're looking for Marla Powell," Camille said. "I'm Marla." Camille took a breath. "You were 13 when the fire at the Spencer home happened." Marla flinched. "You here to redig that?" "I'm here to finish it." Marla looked down. "No one ever asked me what I saw. They told me it was handled." Camille nodded. "But I'm asking now. Do you remember anything? Anything that didn't sit right?" Marla's voice dropped to a whisper. "I saw a truck leave the house just before it caught fire. There were 2 people in it, one in the driver's seat, one in the passenger." She hesitated. "The one in the passenger seat was a kid." Camille's eyes widened. "Which one?" Marla swallowed. "I don't know. I only saw the outline, but they weren't struggling. They looked like they'd been told to stay quiet." She paused. "The driver had white hair. Or maybe it just looked that way in the porch light." Camille's pen stilled. Henry Spencer's records described him as dark-haired, thinning. But bleach? That was a known tactic. Change your look. Move at night. Fake your death. Marla looked her dead in the eye. "He's not gone, is he?" Camille didn't answer. She didn't have to. October 24th, 2024. Location: Hollow Hills, evidence locker, cold case room. The chair had been sitting in the evidence locker for 5 days, sealed, labeled, untouched, until now. Camille Reyes stood over the child-sized wooden frame, reinforced at each joint with thick bolts. It wasn't furniture. It was restraint. A tool. The seat had been fitted with leather cuffs, old but functional. Across the front edge, where a child's knees would rest, the wood was worn smooth from pressure, friction, time. But what made Camille pause was underneath. A technician named Val was the first to spot it. 4 letters carved into the underside of the seat with something thin, a nail or knife. RIO, that's all. No last letter. No name in any record matching those initials. No Rio listed in any of the Spencer Foster logs. No intake file. No photo. Nothing in the tapes. Camille stared at it, her chest tightening. She'd listened to 3 tapes so far. Billy, Marnie, Devin. All mentioned the others. But they'd never given numbers. Never listed full names. Camille flipped open her notebook and jotted 5 known children. Only 4 had confirmed intake files. 5th, Billy, referred to a quiet boy in the corner named Rio. The voice didn't appear on any of the recordings. There was no interview number 5. Who was Rio? And why wasn't he documented? She played the Billy Monroe tape again, this time with the volume turned up and the lights off. Interview number 1. Billy, age 7, July 5th, 1987. Spencer's voice. "Do you like the pink room?" Billy. "No." Spencer. "That's okay." Rio didn't either at first. Pause. Billy. "Where is he?" Spencer. "He's learning how to be quiet." Billy. "He doesn't talk." Spencer. "That's because he listens better than you." Camille sat up straight. That wasn't a reference in passing. That was proximity. Rio had been in the same room, at the same time, possibly before Billy. She hit rewind, played it again. Same words, same hollow silence where Rio's name was dropped like a whisper into the dark. And no intake date, which meant one thing. Rio might have been there before the others, before the known 5, the prototype. Camille grabbed the Ridgeview records again. The pre-Spencer logs, back when the facility was still licensed as a behavioral treatment home. The first name that popped was chilling. Rio H. Barnes. Date of birth, May 4th, 1980. Transferred to Ridgeview from a residential home in Chattanooga. Marked as nonverbal severe trauma background. File status, transferred July 1986. Destination, blank. Just blank. In the system, that usually meant reabsorbed by family, moved to another institution, or, Camille's stomach turned, administratively vanished. She scanned the remaining entries. No other mention of Rio Barnes after July 1986, except one odd annotation. In the margin, handwritten, someone had scrawled, "Still not adjusting. HS recommends isolation for improved compliance." HS Henry Spencer. Rio had been there, at Ridgeview, and Spencer had tested his program on him first. That night, Camille called Agent Joy Halstead from the BAU. "I think Spencer had a prototype subject," Camille said. "Someone predating the others. No file, no photos, just a name etched into a chair." Joy was quiet a moment. Then, "You don't carve someone's name into a chair unless they sat there a long time." "And no one remembered him," Camille added. "Not the police, not the caseworkers. Just gone." "You think he was the first?" Joy asked. "I think he was the one they practiced on. I think the pink room was built for him." Joy exhaled. "Then that means Spencer didn't just want obedience. He wanted something repeatable, something trainable, and Rio was his control group." Camille's voice dropped. "And we never found him." Location, Spencer property. Night surveillance setup. Date, October 25th, 2024. 2 nights later, Camille returned to the Spencer house. She had permission to install surveillance equipment. Not because anyone believed Spencer would come back, but because Camille did. The place had a gravity to it, a wound that never closed. She walked slowly through the basement, flashlight sweeping along the concrete. The chair was gone, but the air still remembered it. And in the far corner, behind the false wall, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. A discolored brick, not carved, just different. She tapped it, hollow, pulled it loose. Behind it was a second cavity, smaller than the one with the filing cabinet. Inside, a single cassette, hand-labeled in smeared ink. Rio, Phase 0. Camille held it in shaking fingers. There was a tape. There had always been a tape. She didn't listen at home. She waited until she was back in the precinct, door locked, headphones on. The tape began with silence. Then a child's breathing, uneven, shaky. Then Spencer's voice. "This is our first day. You don't have to talk yet, but you have to stay awake." Soft knock on wood, perhaps the chair. "Do you hear me, Rio?" Long pause. "Don't look at the door. It's not going to open again until you're ready." Camille pressed stop. She sat in the dark of the cold case room, bile rising in her throat. The pink room wasn't a room. It was a prison. And Rio had been the first to disappear into it. No escape, no voice. Just a tape that was never meant to be heard. October 27th, 2024. Location, Chattanooga, Tennessee. Orchard Hill. Senior living. The sun was low over the hills as Camille Reyes stepped through the sliding glass doors of Orchard Hill Senior Living, a folder tucked under her arm and questions still forming in her mind. She had driven 2 hours that morning to meet Dorothy Barnes, the last known family member of Rio, the undocumented boy who had been carved into the underside of a restraint chair. Dorothy's room was quiet, except for the ticking of a wall clock and the occasional rustle of wind against the window. Camille introduced herself softly. The old woman, seated in a worn recliner beneath a crocheted blanket, looked up with sharp, steady eyes. "You're here about Rio," she said, not as a question, but a fact. Camille nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I'm trying to understand what happened to him." Dorothy gave a bitter smile, more pain than warmth. "He was my grandson. I raised him after my daughter died. Sweet boy. Wouldn't talk to anyone but me. He loved climbing trees, hated thunder." She paused to swallow. "They said I was too old. Said he needed more than I could give. State came one afternoon and took him. Just like that. Told me he'd be placed temporarily until they found a better solution." "And that was the last time you saw him?" "No," Dorothy said. "I saw him once more, at Ridgeview. They let me visit. He was behind glass, sitting on the floor like an animal. He looked right at me. Detective. I swear he remembered. But he didn't speak." Camille took notes, her pen tight in her grip. "Did they ever tell you what happened to him after that?" Dorothy leaned over with effort and opened the drawer of a small metal cabinet beside her chair. From it, she pulled a rusted tin box, filled with folded letters and yellowed scraps of paper. She handed Camille one envelope in particular. "I got this a few months after that visit. No return address, just this." Camille unfolded the brittle letter. The printed words were impersonal. "We are writing to inform you that your foster child, Rio H. Barnes, has been successfully transferred to a long-term behavioral facility. Due to confidentiality, we are unable to disclose further details." There was no phone number, no contact name. Just a typed signature, Linda J. Mercer, Tennessee State Foster Care Coordinator. "I called every office I could find," Dorothy muttered. No one answered. Then one day, they told me no such child had ever been in the system. That's when I knew. "Knew what?" Camille asked. "That he was gone. Not lost. Taken." Later, as Camille stepped back into her car, the letter tucked into her bag, one name stayed in her head. Calvin. Dorothy had said he was Rio's friend, a boy who lived with him briefly in a group home before Ridgeview. He was quiet too, she'd said, but he watched everything. I think he knew more than he let on. Dorothy hadn't seen him in years, but recalled he'd changed his last name to Hall. Camille made a note to check the name. By that evening, back in Nashville, she was parked in front of a public records terminal. The state database was slow, but not impenetrable. Only 3 men named Calvin Lewis had been born in the right range. Only one had been made a ward of the state in 1985, and in 2009, that man had legally changed his name to Calvin Hall. Camille scribbled the new address, McMinnville, 90 minutes away. She drove there before the sun went down. The apartment complex was plain brick, small windows, dying ivy crawling up the corners. Camille buzzed Unit 3B, heart already ticking faster. A man's voice answered after a pause. "Yeah," she cleared her throat. "Mr. Hall, Detective Reyes, Cold Case Division, I need to ask you about Rio Barnes." There was silence, then a heavy click as the lock released. Upstairs, Calvin Hall stood in the doorway. Late 40s, tall, cautious. His eyes were bloodshot but alert. "You're the first person to say that name to me in 30 years, he said. "Come in." The living room smelled faintly of dust and coffee grounds. A lamp on the desk barely lit the space. Camille took a seat across from him. "We were kids together," he said. "First at Stonebrook, then Ridgeview, but he wasn't there long. What do you remember about him?" Calvin scratched his chin. He didn't talk, but we used to pass drawings through the air vent between rooms. I remember one. Always the same house, same swing set, same little boy wearing headphones. No face, just the headphones. Camille froze. "Did you see him after he was moved?" Calvin nodded slowly. "Once. They brought him to a group orientation. He wouldn't look at me, but there were bruises on his wrists. When I asked if I could say hello, The staff said he was in something called processing. Camille frowned. What did that mean? I don't know, but kids went into that wing and came back. Different, if they came back at all. He got up and rifled through a drawer. From it, he produced a child's drawing. Paper thin and creased. The pencil lines had faded with time, but the imagery was still clear. A yellow house, 2 trees, a crooked swing set, a child standing beneath it wearing large headphones, mouth erased. He gave this to me the day before he left Ridgeview, Calvin said, voice tight. Said the music never stopped, even when nobody was there. Camille leaned in. What kind of music? He didn't say, just that it made him forget things. She took the paper gently. Everything was aligning. The tapes, the chair, the headphones, the silence. Back in her car, Camille called Joy Halstead at the bureau. I think Spencer was using auditory triggers, she said. Like conditioning techniques. That's why the kids stopped talking, why they flinched at music. Joy was quiet. That would mean this was more than abuse. Camille nodded, gripping the wheel. It was training, reprogramming. And Rio, he was the first. She paused, breath caught in her throat. And maybe he survived. October 29th, 2024, location, Hollow Hills, cold case room, Spencer residence basement. The Rio tape had been sitting untouched on Camille's desk for 2 days, labeled in smeared ink. Rio, Phase 0. It had already been played once, under fluorescent light, in the safety of the evidence room. But Camille knew something was off. She couldn't explain it. It wasn't what the tape contained, it was what it didn't. So, on a rainy Tuesday morning, she returned to the precinct early before anyone else had arrived. The sky outside was still slate gray, and her coffee had gone cold on the dash. She slipped the tape into the deck and pressed play again, this time with noise-canceling headphones on, volume slightly higher than before. The hiss of analog static filled her ears. Then, the familiar voice. Spencer. This is our first day. You don't have to talk yet, but you have to stay awake. A pause. Spencer. Do you hear me, Rio? Longer pause. Spencer. Don't look at the door. It's not going to open again until you're ready. Same as before. But then, just after that last line, a small sound crept in, barely audible. Camille froze. She rewound. Slowed playback by half speed. It was a whisper, a voice. Not Spencer's. Child's voice, faint. It hurts behind the wall. Camille yanked off the headphones. Behind the wall? She rewound again, more carefully this time, and replayed the full minute. Yes, clear now. A whisper tucked in the silence, like a voice that had bled onto the tape magnetically, almost by accident. The sound of someone close to the microphone but trying not to speak. It hurts behind the wall. Not scripted, not part of any recorded exchange, a captured moment. And that changed everything. An hour later, Camille was back in the basement of the Spencer property, alone. She'd brought a portable reel-to-reel deck and a digital recorder for backup. The false wall had already been removed days earlier, but now she turned her attention to the smaller alcove, the one where the tape had been found. She scanned every inch with a UV flashlight, looking for anything missed. That's when she saw it. In the corner, behind a support beam, high near the ceiling. A faint set of scratch marks, not writing, not symbols, just marks, repetitive. 4 vertical, 1 diagonal, then again, and again. Tally marks, Camille counted, 57 in total. She exhaled slowly. That was nearly 2 months. 2 months someone, presumably Rio, had been in that room. And now a whisper, suggesting he wasn't alone, that there was something behind the wall. Camille contacted the Bureau's digital forensics lab and asked them to run magnetic bleed analysis on the Rio tape. It was a long shot. Analog tapes didn't always retain shadow impressions unless they'd been reused or stored improperly. But if the whisper was real, there might be more. By the time she returned to the precinct that afternoon, the results had arrived. The technician's report was short, but chilling. Subject: tape contains magnetic echo from prior recording. A secondary track, lower in volume, off-axis, contains fragments of a female voice, likely adolescent, with words difficult to decipher. Further isolated phrases include, "He's not gone. They made me forget. Rio isn't the only one." Camille stared at the report, heart racing. A female voice. That meant Rio wasn't the only one trained in isolation. Another child, likely older, possibly from a different phase, someone who may have survived and remembered. If that secondary voice was real, it also meant that Spencer reused tapes, recorded over them, but not completely. The pink room didn't just contain victims, it contained witnesses. By nightfall, Camille sat in her apartment surrounded by printouts, photographs, and reports. One wall of her office had become a timeline of the Ridgeview disappearances and Spencer's known movements. Billy, Marnie, Devin, Kayla, Jeremy, all documented, all found in the tapes. And then Rio, the first, the unknown. And now, a girl, a voice not yet named. Who was she? Camille pulled the oldest log from Ridgeview's intake records, a brief entry dated January 1986. One line stood out. Subject 00-B, female, approximately age 11, no prior file. Referred by private sponsor. No name, no background, no parent. No one ever came looking. Camille's voice trembled as she whispered it aloud. 00-B. The first girl. Before Rio. Before the program had a name. Before the pink room was even pink. Later that night, Camille met with Joy Halstead at a local diner. Joy flipped through the printed audio report while nursing a cup of black coffee. They were training them, she said, conditioning memory suppression through trauma, using isolation and repetition. Camille nodded. I think it started with the girl. Then they refined it on Rio. And the goal? Joy asked. Camille didn't speak at first. She stared out the window at the dark parking lot, the flickering neon light above the welcome sign. To make them forget who they were, she said finally. So they'd never go home, so they'd never want to. Joy closed the folder, and if Rio remembered, Camille met her eyes. Then he's the key to everything. And if he's alive, he's running. November 1st, 2024. Location: Knoxville, Tennessee, Monroe Children's Hospital Archives. The elevator groaned as it descended into the sub-level archives of Monroe Children's Hospital. Camille's badge had barely gotten her access. Most of the records from the 1980s were boxed, yellowing, and fragile, kept only because no one had bothered to shred them. She stepped into the cold hallway, the lights flickering above her. A volunteer archivist named Marcus pointed her toward the back storage room. Most of the 86 files are boxed by admission number, he said. We don't have names in the index until 88. Camille nodded. That's fine. I'm looking for a female patient, no name, admitted early 1986. Referred anonymously. Marcus frowned. We had a few of those back then, usually court involved. You might get lucky. She spent the next 2 hours digging. Boxes of incident reports, psych evaluations, nurse logs, most handwritten, some nearly illegible. But then, buried under a folder of unfiled forms, Camille found it. A single intake sheet. January 13th, 1986. Patient ID 00-B, no name listed. Age 11. Sex female. Referral. Private program transfer. Behavioral instability. Pre-adjudicated minor. Assigned to Dr. Spencer R. Halden. Camille's chest tightened. There was a second page. Scanned faintly behind the ink was a name that had been whited out and typed over, but with enough light and the right angle, she could still see what had been there originally. Karen Duval. 3 hours later, Camille stood outside an aging house on the far edge of Knoxville, the last known address of Marjorie Duval, Karen's maternal aunt. The front porch sagged. A metal lawn chair was overturned in the yard. Camille knocked 3 times. A woman in her 60s opened the door, robe tied tightly, cigarette burning low. "Whatever you're selling, I'm not selling anything," Camille interrupted gently. "My name is Camille Reyes. I'm a detective with the Hollow Hills Cold Case Division. I'm here about your niece, Karen." The name hit like a slap. Marjorie's lips parted. She stared. For a long time, she didn't blink. She was... What did they say? The woman finally whispered. "Unreachable, violent." I never believed that. But they put her in the hospital and that was it. No one ever filed a missing persons report. "They told me not to," Marjorie said. "Told me she was being transferred to a secure facility. Told me she wasn't mine anymore." Her voice shook. "I kept her things all these years because I thought maybe one day..." She didn't finish the sentence. Instead, she turned and disappeared down the hall. When she returned, she was holding a plastic storage bin, dusty, taped at the corners. Camille followed her inside. They opened it together. Inside were photographs, a wiry, dark-haired girl with wary eyes, drawings, a school ID, and at the bottom, a cassette. Camille's breath caught. Written in black marker across the label, "Karen, Room 3. Back at the precinct that evening, Camille digitized the tape and sat with headphones on. The voice was faint, buried under static and moments of silence. But there it was. Karen, whispering, "I don't know my name anymore." Pause. "He says I was born here, but I wasn't. I remember the sky." Pause. "Rio still talks in his sleep. That's why they keep the music loud." Camille sat still. The music. Again. "If I forget long enough, he says I can go outside, but I don't believe him. I don't think outside is real anymore." Camille stopped the tape. Karen had been the first. The test subject. The one Spencer used before the boys. Rio had been placed next. And he had seen her. That was the missing piece. And the reason they'd been erased from every file was because Project Tundra, the rumored conditioning experiment Camille had been circling, wasn't just a myth. It started here, in Tennessee, with Karen. At home that night, Camille pinned Karen's photo beside Rio's on her board. Beneath it, a short note. Not forgotten, just hidden. She stared at the board. All these children, misfiled, renamed, discarded. And yet their voices had survived, buried inside degraded tapes and unburned storage boxes. She didn't know if Karen was alive, but someone had taken care to silence her memory. And that meant there was still something, or someone, left to protect. November 4th, 2024. Location: Nashville, Tennessee. Hollow Hills, Cold Case Division. The envelope was waiting for Camille when she stepped into her office just after 7 a.m. No stamp, no return address, just her name, Detective Reyes, written in thick block letters with a permanent marker. She hesitated before opening it. The paper inside was folded in quarters, worn soft at the creases. A photocopy of a foster care file. Partial, incomplete. The child's name had been blacked out with heavy ink, but the intake date and assigned placement were legible. Placement: Ridgeview Center for Stabilization. Unit B date: May 23rd, 1987. Caseworker: Linda J. Mercer. Camille's heart skipped. Linda again. Beneath the form was a single sentence, handwritten in the same black marker as the envelope. "He didn't burn." She stared at it. No explanation, no signature, just those 3 words. She turned the paper over. On the back was a Xeroxed image, grainy and high contrast, of what looked like a charred hallway. At first, she couldn't make sense of it, but then, in the corner, She spotted it. A figure, barely visible, standing in the shadows beyond the fire damage. The timestamp in the bottom corner read July 2nd, 1989, the night of the Spencer House fire. But according to the official report, Henry Spencer's body had been recovered from the basement, burned beyond recognition. So who the hell was that? By mid-morning, Camille was back in records, combing through Ridgeview's fire reports and state autopsy logs. She pulled the original coroner's assessment from '89 and read it slowly. Unidentified male body recovered. No dental match available. Burned beyond standard forensic recognition. Presumed identity, Henry Elias Spencer, based on circumstantial evidence. Presumed. That word echoed in her skull. She flipped to the attached morgue photo, blurry, black and white. No identifying features, no definitive link. It hadn't been confirmed, only assumed. And suddenly the whisper made sense. He didn't burn. Henry Spencer had disappeared that night, same as the 5 children, but someone had arranged it to look like he died with them. Someone had switched the body. The missing children were presumed dead. So was Spencer. But what if none of them had died? What if some had escaped? Or been moved? That afternoon, Camille met with Joy Halstead at the Bureau's regional field office. She placed the envelope on the desk between them. Joy read it twice. "Where did this come from?" "No idea," Camille said. "Someone walked it in. No fingerprints on the paper or envelope. But the file copy, it's real. The date matches a known intake, but the child's identity was wiped." Again, Joy's brow furrowed. "That handwriting, the block letters, that's the same style that was scratched into the wall near the filing cabinet." Camille nodded. "It's not just a note. It's a message. You think one of the kids is alive? I think someone was watching that night. Maybe even someone who worked at Ridgeview. Someone who knew Spencer's routine, who knew how to vanish him." Joy was silent for a long moment. Then she whispered, "You think he's still alive?" Camille didn't answer right away. She pulled the photocopy of the hallway image from the folder and handed it over. "Maybe not as Henry Spencer," she said. "But that man in the picture, he walked out." Back at her desk, Camille went over the envelope again. The postmark was smudged. The paper itself had faint traces of coffee and plastic adhesive, the kind used in badge laminates. She bagged the envelope for further analysis. Then she stared at the final sentence one more time. He didn't burn. Whoever sent this didn't just want her to reopen the fire case. They wanted her to look for Henry Spencer now. But under what name? That evening, she opened the cold case database and began running a new set of queries. Men aged 70 to 85 with no digital record before 1990. Residents of Tennessee and neighboring states. No birth certificate match alias. Use suspected former foster system employees retired under sealed identities. She found 16. 3 had died. 9 were ruled out by DNA. 4 remained. And one of them, a man named Peter Halverson, now living outside Jonesboro, Tennessee, had formerly worked in private adolescent rehabilitation and had burn marks across his right hand and cheek. Camille packed her overnight bag. She wasn't calling it in yet. Not until she was sure. But someone had gone to great lengths to stay buried. And now, bit by bit, the dirt was coming off. November 6th, 2024. Location, Jonesboro, Tennessee. Residence of Peter Halverson. The drive to Jonesboro took 3 hours along winding back roads where cell signal dropped and daylight vanished early. Camille kept the heat on low and the windows cracked despite the chill. It helped her stay alert. The town was old, brick-lined, with antique shops and empty benches. At the edge of a wooded hollow sat a one-story white clapboard house. A mailbox leaned to one side. The driveway was unpaved. Peter Halverson, the man who'd emerged in 1990 with no prior records, owned the property under a trust. Former occupation, youth counselor, retired in 2011. Scar tissue documented on an ER report from 1993. Residual burns, consistent with chemical or thermal exposure. Camille parked at the edge of the driveway and walked the last 50 feet on foot. A security camera watched from beneath the eaves. She rang the bell. It was several minutes before the door opened. The man who stood there was tall, gaunt, with silver hair and eyes that didn't blink quickly. The right side of his face was puckered from healed burn scars, extending into his neck and ear. His right hand bore similar damage. He didn't speak at first. Then, "You're not from around here?" "No," Camille replied calmly. "Detective Camille Reyes, Cold Case Division. I'd like to ask you a few questions." "I'm not in trouble." "Number." "But someone you might have been." "Might be." His eyes flickered. "I don't talk to police." She reached slowly into her coat pocket and pulled out a photograph. Karen Duval, age 11, staring just off camera with tired, angry eyes. She held it up. "Do you remember her?" The man flinched, a near imperceptible twitch in his jaw. Then he stepped back from the door. Camille followed him inside. The living room was sparse. No TV, no decorations. A recliner, 2 wooden chairs, and a desk piled with old paperbacks. On the wall hung a single frame, a photo of a young boy, maybe 8 or 9, holding a toy airplane. Camille sat in the wooden chair. The man, Peter, didn't offer coffee or water. He lowered himself slowly into the recliner, rubbing his right hand with his left. He stared at the photo in Camille's hand. "She was the first," he said, voice low. "But not the only." "Who was she to you?" "No one. She was supposed to be a test." He met her eyes. But she remembered. Camille's pulse ticked faster. "You're not Peter Halverson, are you?" A long silence. "I was," he said. "I am now." "Were you ever Henry Spencer?" Another pause. Then he said, "They needed someone to build the house. I just laid the bricks." Camille hit record on her pocket audio device. "What was Project Tundra?" she asked. Peter didn't look away. "It wasn't called that at the start. That came later. At first it was just a behavioral experiment. Something private, for a handful of clients who had money and children they wanted changed." "Changed how?" "Erased," he said. Camille leaned forward. "And the pink room?" "That was phase 2. Total environmental reset. No names, no mirrors, no language. The idea was, if a child didn't know who they were, and no one told them, maybe they'd become something else." He touched the scar on his cheek absently. Karen was the first. She resisted. She remembered colors, faces, smells. She sang in her sleep. "Did she survive?" "I don't know," he said quietly. "After phase 3 began, I stopped being allowed inside." "Who took over?" Peter didn't speak. "She changed tack." "What happened the night of the fire?" "I didn't start it, but I didn't stop it either." He looked at her then, and the thing in his eyes wasn't guilt. It was fatigue. "They burned everything. The files, the tapes, except the ones I hid." "You hid them?" "In the wall," he said. "I knew someday someone would come looking." Camille swallowed. "Why?" "Because there's one child no one asked about. Not Karen, not Rio, not the others." She stared at him. "Who?" Peter looked away. Then whispered, "My son." Back in her rental car, Camille listened to the full recording 3 times. Peter Halverson, or Henry Spencer, or whatever name he'd taken, had confessed not to the abuse itself, but to helping build the structure that enabled it. The housing, the paperwork, the control systems, a fortress for silence. He had also claimed he lost his son to the program, a boy unnamed in any file. And that meant one more child, unrecorded, unclaimed, and possibly still alive. A missing piece. And suddenly, the photograph on the wall, the boy with the airplane, made sense. Camille forwarded the audio file to Joy Halstead with a single subject line. He lived. He remembers, and he built the system. 10 minutes later, her phone rang. Joy's voice was strained. "We got another envelope," she said. "Postmarked this morning. What's inside?" Joy hesitated. "A photo. From 1990. It's Karen. Older. Alive." Camille's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "She got out," she whispered. And now someone was showing her the path she took. November 9th, 2024. Location: Atlanta, Georgia. Saint Germain Medical Archives. The intake form was brittle, discolored with age, and misfiled under John Doe. Only someone looking for the wrong person in the right place would have found it. Joy had, late the night before, tracing the envelope's postmark to a nearby processing center outside Atlanta. Now Camille stood in the archives room of Saint Germain Medical Center, fluorescent light buzzing overhead, as the clerk handed her the document. Patient name, unknown female age, approximately 15 to 16, brought in by unidentified driver, left before interview. Date of admission, April 28, 1990. Presenting injuries: second-degree burns, right wrist and shoulder. Disorientation, possible psychosis. Notes, repeated statement: "My name was taken." Camille felt her throat tighten. The girl had no ID, no fingerprints in any system. Her answers were vague, often contradictory, and the social worker who interviewed her filed the report under transient trauma response. After a week, she'd been transferred to a transitional youth shelter, the kind meant for undocumented teens or runaways. The address for that shelter no longer existed, but a name was scribbled in the margin of the intake sheet. Sister Miriam approved final placement. See attached. Camille flipped to the next page. A photocopy of a handwritten letter. "To whom it may concern, the young woman placed under our care, whom we will call Clara, will be transferred to the Sisters of Second Mercy, per court approval, under provisional guardianship. S. Miriam Calloway, May 4th, 1990. At the bottom, a phone number. Disconnected, but Sisters of Second Mercy still operated, just not in Atlanta. The order had relocated in 1997 to a new convent outside Savannah. Camille made the 4-hour drive by early afternoon. The convent was small, modest. A squat brick building with a white steeple and shaded garden out back. She parked in the gravel lot and rang the bell. A woman in a navy habit answered. Mid-60s, wiry frame, tired eyes. "Sister Miriam?" Camille asked. The nun nodded. "I'm Detective Reyes, Hollow Hills Cold Case Division. I'm following up on someone placed in your care in 1990. A teenage girl named Clara. But that wasn't her real name." Sister Miriam studied her for a long moment, then stepped back. "Come in." Inside, the chapel was silent. Camille followed the nun to a small parlor with framed photos lining one wall. Group shots of women and girls, year after year. At the far end of the room sat a record cabinet, meticulously organized by decade. Sister Miriam unlocked it and pulled out a thin folder. Inside, a photo, a one-page medical form, and a letter signed by Miriam herself. "She stayed with us for 4 years," Miriam said quietly. "Never spoke about where she came from, but she had night terrors, always about fire." Camille stared at the photo. The girl's hair was darker, fuller, but the eyes were the same. Karen Duval. "She left in 1994, Miriam continued. "Took a bus west, sent postcards sometimes. Last I heard, she was living under a different name, working with youth. Do you know where?" She used the name Clara Halden. Said it was the only name she ever remembered someone calling her. Camille felt goosebumps rise. Halden. Spencer Halden. The name tied to the hospital records. Karen had remembered something after all. Enough to stitch a new identity from an old nightmare. "She left an address once," Sister Miriam said, rising and rifling through a drawer. She returned with an old envelope, corners curled. Camille unfolded it. A return address in Flagstaff, Arizona. The name on the corner, Clara H., Community Wellness Outreach. Camille stood outside the convent 15 minutes later, phone pressed to her ear. Joy answered on the second ring. "She survived," Camille said. "You're sure?" "I have a photo, a paper trail, a name she chose herself." Clara Halden. "You think she'd talk to you?" "I think she's been waiting for someone to ask." There was a pause. Then Joy said, "Then go." By nightfall, Camille was on a flight west. Somewhere in Arizona, the girl who'd been called Karen, who'd been erased, burned, renamed, had built a life from what remained. And if she still carried those memories, if she still remembered Rio or Peter Halverson or the others, then maybe, just maybe, she still remembered who else never made it out. November 11th, 2024. Location: Flagstaff, Arizona. Community Wellness Outreach Center. It was raining in Arizona, the kind of slow, steady rain that felt foreign against the red clay and dry stone. Camille stood outside a modest stucco building on the edge of town, where an aging metal sign read, Community Wellness Outreach Trauma Support, Counseling, Youth Advocacy. Inside, a small receptionist desk and worn furniture greeted her. The woman behind the counter looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" Camille offered a gentle smile. "I'm looking for Clara Halden. I'm not here for services. I'm here for her." The woman hesitated. "She doesn't take walk-ins." "I'm not a client. I'm a detective. I'm here about something that happened a long time ago. Something she survived." That changed the air. "Wait here," the receptionist said, standing. 10 minutes passed. Camille didn't sit. She watched the rain slide down the windows and wondered how to begin. When Clara walked in, Camille recognized her immediately. Not because she looked the same, but because her presence was unmistakable. Quiet. Watchful. Like someone who had learned to read every shadow in a room. Clara was in her early 50s now. Her hair was tied back loosely, streaked with gray. She wore jeans, a faded flannel shirt, and a wrist cuff that covered the old burn scar Camille had seen in the photo from 1990. Their eyes met. Neither woman spoke. Then Clara broke the silence. "You found me." Camille nodded. "You left a trail." They sat in Clara's office, door closed, blinds drawn. The room smelled like cedar and peppermint oil. A small bookshelf held trauma recovery manuals and a row of antique dolls, their eyes painted wide, frozen in porcelain surprise. Camille clicked her recorder on. "Do you know why I'm here?" Clara nodded slowly. "You're not the first to ask," she said. "But you're the first one I've answered." Camille leaned forward. "Tell me what happened. In your own words." Clara took a breath, then began. "There were 7 of us at first. Me, Rio, Isaiah, a girl named Bly, and 3 others I never knew by name. Spencer called us by colors. I was red. Rio was green. We didn't speak unless told to. We weren't supposed to look at each other. No names, no mirrors, no clocks." Her voice didn't waver. It was steady, not rehearsed, remembered. "He told us time would break us if we counted it. That memory was the enemy. That if we forgot our parents, our names, even the way our voice sounded, we'd become free." "Free from what?" Camille asked. "From pain, from fear, from needing anyone." Clara looked down. But that was a lie. All it did was bury us. Camille listened as Clara described the pink room, a soundproofed space with soft lighting, white noise machines, and no furniture. Each child was isolated for days, then brought into group conditioning where they were forced to mimic praise, recite mantras, accept new identities. Compliance earned outside time, resistance earned music, Loud, punishing, disorienting music, sometimes for hours. I used to dream in static, Clara whispered. I'd wake up and not know where I ended or the room began. What about the others? Camille asked. Do you know what happened to them? Some gave in. Some fought. Rio. He fought the longest. Camille nodded. I know. I've heard his voice. Clara looked surprised. There's a tape. I thought they burned everything, she said quietly. That night, the fire, it wasn't an accident. It was a cleanse. Did you start it? Clara shook her head. Number. But I didn't stay to watch it end. Camille took out the photo, the boy with the airplane. Do you know him? Clara's eyes softened. Yes, Peter Halverson's son. She nodded. He was one of the first, but not part of the program. He lived there, watched us through the vents, brought us food sometimes when Spencer was gone. He didn't speak until he was almost 10. Spencer called him the Seed. Camille frowned. What did that mean? Clara hesitated. He said everything we were doing, all the experiments, would grow inside his son. That one day, he'd carry it forward. Did he? No. Clara paused. He died in the fire. The room fell silent. Rain continued tapping the windows, soft and steady. Camille asked, Are you sure? I carried him, Clara said. Through the smoke. He wasn't breathing when I reached the road. I left him under the bridge. I don't know if anyone found him. Camille felt something shift in her chest. Grief and clarity all at once. That's why Peter disappeared. He knew. Clara nodded. But he never said goodbye, and he never looked for me. Camille placed her hand gently on the desk. He's alive. I found him. He told me about you, about his son, about what he helped build. Clara looked away, eyes shining but dry. I didn't want to be found. I know, Camille said. But there's one more child. A boy. Not in any file. A ghost in the background. We think you may be the last one who saw him. Clara looked up. Something in her expression shifted. There was one more, she whispered. He wasn't in the group. He was kept alone. I only saw him once. His hands were bound, but not with rope, with words. He didn't speak because they'd erased language from him. What was his name? Clara looked haunted. They called him Echo. November 14th, 2024. Location: Nashville, Tennessee. Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, Cold Case Unit. The morning air was sharp with frost, the kind that stung the nose and burned the lungs. Camille stepped out of her car in the TBI parking lot just before dawn, holding the folder with Clara's full testimony. The audio recording, the photos, and Karen's letter. They were all in place. Inside, the cold case unit was mostly empty. Just the whir of old radiators and the scent of stale coffee. Joy was already there, hunched over a crime board with new pushpins and strings radiating from a photo of Henry Spencer, a.k.a. Peter Halverson. Camille handed her the folder. That's everything Clara remembers. Timelines, names, methods, and one more thing. Joy raised her eyebrows. Yeah? She said there was another child, not recorded in the files. She only heard the name once. Echo. A boy kept in isolation, language stripped, behavioral test subject. Possibly the same boy Peter called his son. Joy sat heavily in her chair. You think Echo survived? Camille exhaled slowly. I think Echo never left. By mid-morning, Camille stepped into the bullpen to grab a printout from the shared copier. She froze, scratched into the cork of the precinct's bulletin board, in uneven, gouged lettering, were 3 words. Echo remembers everything. There was no note, no witness. Just those words, deep and deliberate, surrounded by curling tacks and old flyers. Camille leaned in. The scratches were fresh, maybe an hour old. Someone had come inside, or already was inside. She pulled down the nearest surveillance feed. The camera outside the bullpen had caught something, a figure in a hoodie, face turned away, entering the stairwell at 4:27 a.m. The motion sensor inside the bullpen was triggered 3 minutes later. No one had swiped a keycard. No prints. Camille stared at the footage, dread twisting in her chest. Echo wasn't a ghost from the past. He was watching the present. By afternoon, Joy had the forensics team scanning the scratched letters, the corkboard, the hallway. Nothing, no DNA, no prints. The scratches had been made with something metallic, possibly a key or a blade. "Someone's playing us," Joy muttered. "No," Camille said. "Someone's warning us." She stepped back into the records room, now filled with photos of Karen, Rio, the original 5 names carved into the wall, and Clara's later years. Taped across the central timeline was a single question written in marker. Who was Echo? And then, beneath it, where's he now? Later that night, Camille returned to her apartment. Rain had started again, a slow, cold drizzle that made everything feel older. She dropped her coat on the couch and opened her laptop. A new email blinked in her inbox. Subject line: "It wasn't the fire that killed them." No sender, no reply address. She clicked. "I didn't die in the house." I walked out. Clara carried me part way, but I woke up in the woods, alone. I learned not to speak, learned not to trust sound, but I remember. I remember what Spencer did. I remember what my father watched, and I remember her voice. "You're close now, but don't think you're the only one looking." Attached was an image, grainy, night vision, a still from an old surveillance tape, date stamp 2001. It showed a teenage boy standing at the edge of a foster care group home in rural Kentucky, his face partially obscured. One hand raised to the lens, not in fear, but in warning. Camille enlarged the photo. In the corner of the boy's shirt was something stitched in black thread. Echo. The next morning, Camille and Joy prepared a briefing to present to federal investigators. Project Tundra, long believed to be an isolated cult-like delusion, had roots, survivors, infrastructure, and a pattern. But something gnawed at Camille. Echo wasn't hiding because he feared being found. He was watching because he feared who else might find him first. And if Echo remembered everything, then someone else might be hunting him. Someone who didn't want those memories made public. Camille looked at the case board one last time, then scribbled a final line beneath the others. Echo is real. Echo is alive. And Echo might be the key to everything. December 2nd, 2024. Location unknown. The tape arrived in a plain manila envelope, no return address, postmarked from a sorting center in Kansas. Inside was a single USB drive, unlabeled. Camille plugged it into the Bureau's offline system. The file was audio only. No metadata, just 6 minutes 47 seconds of a boy's voice, slightly distorted, but not disguised. He sounded calm, measured, old enough to understand what he was saying, but still young when it had been recorded. If you're listening, it means you found them. Karen, Rio, the others, maybe even the man who called himself my father. A pause, a soft exhale. He called me Echo because I didn't have a name, because everything I said, I learned from someone else. Their words, their cries, their prayers. A rustling sound. There were more than 5, more than 7. Some stayed for a year, some for a week, some went away and came back with new names and blank eyes. I stayed. I listened. I remembered. Long silence. When the fire came, I waited in the crawl space. Not because I was afraid, because I knew no one would check there. I waited until the sirens left, until the ash settled. Then I walked. The boy's tone changed, warmer, sadder. Clara carried me once. I remember her heartbeat. I remember the way she said, "Don't look back." Another pause. A hum in the background. A fan? A train? They built something they couldn't destroy. A system. A method. Spencer wasn't the only one. He was just the first. If you want to find the rest, follow the missing files, the ones sealed before 1990. Look for homes with no records, shelters that burned, children who aged out but were never seen again. Start where it ended, not at the fire, but in the desert. Click. The audio ended there. No signature, no name, just a file named echofinal.wav. Camille sat for a long time after the audio stopped, staring at the waveform frozen on screen. The voice was a match. She had no doubt. Echo wasn't a rumor. He was a survivor, a witness, and maybe the only one who knew how far the roots of Spencer's program had grown. Camille slid the file into evidence and tagged it. Project Promise. Active. Level 1. Priority. Then she opened a new case folder and wrote one word at the top. Echo. Somewhere out there, the boy without a name had become a man without a face. But now, he had a voice, and the world was finally listening.